The wooden cane tapped softly against the tile floor of Mapleview Nursing Home every morning. But that day, the sound stopped. Emma Rowan, 13 years old, daughter of a maid, had just set down her basket of apples when she saw him. Harold Lane, 78, stumbling forward, his hand trembling violently as if about to collapse. She rushed to catch him, smiling the way she always did. "I'm here. Hold on to me." For 3 months she had quietly become his eyes, his hands, his only companion, when no one else cared enough to notice. But this morning the roar of military engines shattered the silence. The main doors flew open. A general in full uniform stepped inside, flanked by a high-rank escort unit. Every eye in the building turned toward Emma and Harold. That moment changed everything. Before we continue, let me know what country are you watching from. Your presence here helps these small stories reach one more heart. And if you haven't subscribed yet, just hit it once so you won't miss what comes next. Emma lived with her mother, Grace Rowan, a full-time maid for the Harrington estate. Because her mother worked near Mapleview Nursing Home, Emma often waited there after school. At Mapleview, she met Harold Lane, an old man with a lonely presence, quiet, wandering the halls each day with a worn wooden cane. Harold was guarded at first, but one afternoon he stumbled dizzy and about to fall. Emma caught him, and from that day forward, they became friends who never planned to meet, but always did. Emma cared for him every single day. She pushed his wheelchair through the garden when his legs grew weak. She read the newspaper aloud because his eyes had dimmed. She fixed the watch that kept sliding off his wrist. She reminded him when it was time for his medicine. But one morning Emma noticed something wrong with his pill box. The new tablets were a different color. The label was faded, harder to read. The batch number didn't match the instruction sheet. When she asked the nurse on duty, all she got was a cold response. "New prescription, kid. Don't be nosy." But Emma remembered clearly. After Harold took the new pills, his eyes grew foggy. His memory scattered sometimes, forgetting even his own name. Once he whispered to her in confusion, "It doesn't feel like what the doctor gave me. But I can't remember anymore." Emma understood. Something wasn't right. She began secretly documenting the changes in a small notebook. How his hand trembled more after each dose. How he repeated the same sentence 3 times in one conversation. How he stared at the wall as if he'd forgotten where he was. She wrote it all down, dates, symptoms, pill colors, times. No one asked her to. No one even knew she was doing it. But Emma had learned something from her mother: when you care for someone, you pay attention to the details others ignore. Harold grew weaker each week. His speech slowed. His gaze became distant. The nursing staff barely noticed. To them, he was just another elderly man fading away. But to Emma, he was Harold. The man who once told her about flying planes in his younger years. The man who smiled when she brought him green apples because they reminded him of his childhood home. She couldn't let him disappear like this. One evening, as she helped him sip water, Harold looked at her with eyes that seemed to see through time. "You're the only one who still knows I'm here." Emma's throat tightened. "I'll always know, Mr. Lane. I promise." But she didn't know that promise would soon be tested in a way she never imagined. She didn't know that the pills she'd been questioning were part of something far darker. She didn't know that the manager of Mapleview had been replacing real medication with cheap, low-quality substitutes, pocketing the difference. She didn't know that Harold's confusion wasn't just age. It was poisoning, slow, deliberate, hidden. And she didn't know that in less than 48 hours, the truth she'd been gathering in her little notebook would explode into the open right in front of a man powerful enough to make the whole system answer. But for now, Emma simply sat beside Harold in the sunlit corner of the common room, holding his cold hand in hers, reading him the news in a soft, steady voice. The way she did every day. The way no one else ever had. That morning, Emma found Harold shaking worse than ever before, his hands ice cold. When she steadied him for the 3rd day in a row, he said something that made her blood run cold. "I feel like I'm being turned off." As Emma helped him toward the stone bench, the sudden roar of military engines erupted from the front gate of Mapleview. 3 armored SUVs rolled to a stop. Doors opened in unison. Men in uniform stepped out, and last came General Marcus Harrington, 56 years old, his face hard as granite. His eyes sharp enough to cut through steel, his presence commanding enough to freeze the entire nursing home in place. Every staff member exchanged glances, whispering frantically, "Why would a general come here?" The general's gaze locked onto Harold, who was clinging to Emma's arm like a lifeline. His voice came low, heavy with something Emma couldn't name. "Dad, do you remember who I am?" Harold froze. His eyes drifted, lost somewhere far away. Emma felt the panic rising in him. She spoke softly. "Hold my hand. You're okay." The general's brow furrowed as he watched his father lean on a stranger, a child he'd never seen before. One of the officers in the escort unit stepped forward and reported quietly, "General, his memory is worse than we anticipated." The general's jaw tightened. "It wasn't like this before. What happened here?" A nurse quickly inserted herself into the conversation, her tone overly bright. "Sir, your father has been well taken care of." But Emma saw the flicker of nervousness in the woman's eyes. She decided to stay silent. Not yet. Not without proof. The general pointed directly at Emma. "And who is this girl?" Emma answered quietly but clearly. "I just help him every day. I saw that he needed someone." The general looked stunned. The escort unit exchanged glances. A child helping a forgotten old man, but with a bond this strong. The general issued a sharp command. "Bring me all of my father's medical records, every prescription. Now." The head nurse hesitated. Her movements slow, unnaturally delayed. The general's patience snapped. "I gave an order, not a request." Meanwhile, Harold muttered under his breath, his words slurred and confused. "1 pill. Blue. Not white." Emma pulled out her small notebook and handed it to the general without a word. "I wrote everything down. These are the changes week by week." The general stared at the pages in disbelief. A chart with dates and times. Pill colors documented in detail. Frequency of hand tremors. Blood pressure readings Emma had secretly taken. A note that read, "After medication change, memory loss increased 40%. An officer murmured in astonishment. "This kid works like a medical investigator." The general's voice dropped to a dangerous calm. "Who changed my father's medication?" The head nurse finally brought out the pill box, but Emma immediately noticed. "That's not the one from yesterday." The nurse snapped back defensively. "I don't know what you're talking about. This is the same medication." The general's tone turned ice cold. "The word of a 13-year-old girl is worth more to me than yours right now." Emma stepped forward and pointed at the batch code on the label. "Lot 4B7 isn't on this month's approved medication list. I checked the doctor's chart." One of the officers cross-referenced the information on his tablet, then looked up sharply. "Sir, she's correct. This code doesn't exist in the medical system." The nurse's face drained of all color. The general's voice rose sharp and unforgiving. "What did you do to my father?" The truth began to surface like poison breaking through skin. The nurse had been bribed by the facility manager, a man who had been embezzling medication funds by replacing real prescriptions with cheap substandard substitutes. Emma had unknowingly uncovered an entire operation. But the situation wasn't over. Because Harold suddenly collapsed forward, his body going limp in Emma's arms. He was unconscious. And for the first time in 30 years of military command, General Marcus Harrington felt utterly powerless. The head nurse stood frozen, her hands trembling as she clutched the pillbox. The general's voice cut through the silence like a blade. "I'm waiting for an explanation." But the nurse said nothing. Her lips moved, but no sound came out. One of the officers stepped closer. His tone, professional, but firm. "Ma'am, we can do this here, or we can do this at the base. Your choice." Emma knelt beside Harold, checking his pulse the way she'd seen the doctors do. Weak, but steady. She looked up at the general, her voice calm despite the chaos. "He's breathing, but his heart rate is too slow. It's the medication." The general crouched down beside her, his face pale. "How do you know that?" Emma opened her notebook again, flipping to a page filled with tight, careful handwriting. "Every time he took the blue pills, his pulse dropped within 30 minutes. I timed it. Here, here, and here." She pointed to 3 separate entries, each marked with a timestamp and a heart rate number. The general stared at the page, then at Emma. "You've been tracking this for how long?" 11 weeks. The officer standing behind them let out a low whistle. "Sir, this is more detailed than most clinical reports." The general turned his attention back to the nurse, his voice now dangerously quiet. "Who gave the order to change his medication?" The nurse's resolve finally cracked. "It wasn't my idea. I swear. Mr. Calloway, the facility manager, he told us to switch the prescriptions. He said it was a cost-saving measure. He said no one would notice." "Cost-saving?" The general repeated, his tone dripping with contempt. "You poisoned my father to save money." Another nurse, younger and visibly shaking, spoke up from the back of the room. "We didn't know it would hurt them. We thought it was just a generic version." Emma's voice was small but firm. "It's not generic. It's counterfeit." Everyone turned to look at her. She stood up, holding the pill box in her hands. "Generic medication has the same active ingredients. This doesn't. The coating dissolves too fast. The color bleeds when it gets wet. Real pills don't do that." One of the officers took the box from her hands and examined it under the light. "She's right. This is fake." The general's fists clenched at his sides. "Where is Calloway?" The head nurse hesitated, then whispered. "He left this morning. Said he had a meeting in the city." "Find him," the general ordered. "Now." Two officers immediately moved toward the door, pulling out their phones. The general turned back to Harold, who was still unconscious in Emma's arms. "How long has he been taking these?" Emma checked her notes. "The switch happened 9 weeks ago. But I think they've been mixing in bad pills for longer than that. His confusion started almost 4 months ago." The general's face went pale. 4 months. 4 months of poison slowly eroding his father's mind. 4 months that he'd been too busy, too distant, too absent to notice. He looked at Emma, this small girl who had done what an entire medical staff had failed to do, who had done what he, a decorated general, had failed to do: protect his father. "Why didn't you report this sooner?" he asked, his voice breaking slightly. Emma met his eyes, her own filling with tears. "I tried. No one listened. They said I was just a kid. They said I didn't understand how medicine works." The general's jaw tightened. "You understood better than all of them." An officer returned, his expression grim. "Sir, we've located Calloway. He's at the train station. Local PD is moving in now." "Good. I want every document, every transaction, every communication he's had in the last year. If anyone else is involved, I want their names." "Yes, sir." The general knelt down again, gently touching his father's face. Harold's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and confused. "Marcus." "I'm here, Dad. I'm here." Harold's gaze shifted to Emma, and a faint smile crossed his lips. "The girl, she stayed." "She did," the general said softly. "She stayed when I didn't." Emma squeezed Harold's hand. "You're going to be okay now, I promise." But even as she said it, Harold's eyes rolled back, his body going limp once more. The general's voice rose in panic. "Get a medic, now!" The military doctor rushed forward, checking Harold's vitals, his face tense. "His blood pressure is crashing. We need to get him to a real hospital. This facility isn't equipped." The general stood, his voice like iron. "Then we move him, immediately." He looked down at Emma, his expression a mix of gratitude and desperation. "Stay with him, please. You're the only one he trusts." Emma nodded, her small hand still wrapped around Harold's cold fingers. "I won't leave him." And she didn't. Not when they lifted him onto the stretcher. Not when they carried him to the convoy. Not when the engines roared to life and the world outside Mapleview became a blur. Because she had made a promise. And Emma Rowan never broke her promises. The escort unit moved quickly, but Harold's body convulsed in the stretcher. The general reached for his father, trying to steady him, but Harold thrashed wildly, his eyes wide with terror, not recognizing anyone. Emma shouted over the chaos. "Don't touch him. Let me." Everyone froze. The general stepped back, his face twisted in confusion and pain. Emma climbed into the back of the vehicle, taking Harold's hand and pressing it gently against her cheek. "Mr. Lane, it's me. It's Emma. I'm right here. Harold's breathing was ragged, his chest heaving, but slowly the panic in his eyes began to fade. The military medic checked his vitals quickly, his voice tight with concern. Pulses weak. Blood pressure dropping fast. This is a reaction to the counterfeit medication. The general stood like a statue, unable to move, unable to speak. Finally, he whispered, his voice barely audible. Please. Save him. It wasn't a command. It was a plea. Emma looked at the medic, her voice calm but urgent. He needs the real medication. The one he was taking before the switch. Do you have it? The medic shook his head. We don't know what the original prescription was. Emma pulled out her notebook again, flipping to a page near the front. Metoprolol 25 milligrams twice daily, donepezil 10 milligrams once at night, and a low-dose aspirin. The medic stared at her. How do you... I copied it from his chart 3 months ago before they changed everything. The medic immediately radioed ahead to the military hospital. We need those medications ready when we arrive. Stat. Emma turned her attention back to Harold, whose eyes were fluttering, trying to stay open. Stay with me, okay? We're almost there. Harold's lips moved, but no sound came out. Emma leaned closer. What is it? He whispered, so faint she almost missed it. Cold. Emma looked around quickly, then pulled off her own jacket and laid it over his chest. One of the officers moved to stop her. Kid, you don't have to... He's cold, Emma said firmly. He needs it more than I do. The general watched in silence, his throat tight. Harold's hand gripped Emma's weakly, and she held on as if her life depended on it. The medic continued monitoring his vitals, but his expression remained grim. We're losing him. Emma's heart pounded, but she forced herself to stay calm. Elevate his legs. It'll help the blood flow. The medic blinked. That's actually correct. He quickly adjusted Harold's position, propping his legs up on a folded blanket. Emma continued, her voice steady, despite the fear coursing through her. And keep the light low. Bright light makes him anxious. One of the officers dimmed the interior lights without question. The general finally found his voice. Where did you learn all this? Emma didn't look away from Harold. I watched. I paid attention. I asked questions when people would answer. She gently stroked Harold's hand, her thumb moving in slow, soothing circles. And I listened to him. He told me what helped and what didn't. I just remembered. The convoy sped through the city streets, sirens blaring. Harold's breathing grew shallower. The medic's face darkened. His oxygen levels are dropping. Emma leaned down close to Harold's ear. You told me once about flying planes, about how you felt free up there. Think about that, okay? Think about the sky. Harold's eyes opened slightly, a flicker of recognition passing through them. Sky? Yes. The sky. Blue and wide and endless. You're safe up there. Nothing can hurt you. The general's eyes burned with unshed tears as he watched this child do what he couldn't. Reach his father. Bring him back. The medic placed an oxygen mask over Harold's face, his hands moving with practiced precision. We're 2 minutes out. Emma kept talking, her voice a lifeline in the chaos. When you get better, I'll bring you green apples again, the ones you like, and we'll sit in the garden, and you can tell me more stories. Harold's grip on her hand tightened just barely. It was enough. The vehicle screeched to a halt outside the military hospital. The doors flew open, and a team of doctors and nurses rushed forward. They began to lift the stretcher, but Harold's hand refused to let go of Emma's. The head doctor looked at the general. Sir, we need to take him in now. The general looked at Emma, then at his father. Let her stay with him. The doctor hesitated. Sir, she's a minor. Protocol. I don't care about protocol, the general said, his voice breaking. He needs her. The doctor nodded once. Then she comes with us. Emma climbed out of the vehicle, still holding Harold's hand, and walked alongside the stretcher as they rushed him through the doors. The general followed behind, his heart in his throat. For the first time in 30 years of military service, Marcus Harrington understood what it meant to be truly powerless. And for the first time in his life, he understood what his father had needed all along. Not rank, not duty, not pride. Just someone who cared enough to stay. The hospital room was quiet except for the steady beep of the heart monitor. Harold lay still. His breathing finally stabilized, an IV line running into his arm. Emma sat beside him, her hands still wrapped around his. The general stood by the window, staring out at nothing, his shoulders heavy with the weight of 30 years. After a long silence, Harold's eyes opened. He blinked slowly, his gaze moving around the room until it landed on the general. "Marcus." The general turned, his face pale. "Dad." Harold's voice was weak but clear. "It's been a long time." The general crossed the room in 3 strides and dropped to his knees beside the bed, his hand trembling as he reached for his father's. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I left you alone for so long." The sight of it, this powerful man breaking down, brought tears to every eye in the room. Even the nurses standing by the door looked away, wiping at their faces. Harold squeezed his son's hand weakly. "You were busy. I understood." "No," the general said, his voice cracking. "That's not an excuse. I should have been there. I should have visited. I should have known." Emma quietly started to stand, thinking they needed privacy, but Harold's grip tightened on her hand. "Stay," he whispered. She sat back down. The general looked at Emma, truly looked at her, and for the first time saw what his father had seen. Kindness, loyalty, presence, everything he himself had failed to give. "Why did you do this?" he asked, his voice filled with wonder. "Why did you help a stranger every single day?" Emma's answer was simple, honest. He wasn't a stranger. He was just alone. The general's throat tightened. He stood and gestured toward the hallway. "Can I speak with you and your mother for a moment?" Emma looked at Harold, who nodded gently. "Go on, child. I'll be here." In a private room down the hall, the general sat across from Emma and Grace, his military composure gone, replaced by raw vulnerability. "I need to thank you both. Not as a general, as a son." Grace shifted uncomfortably. "Sir, Emma just did what any decent person would." "No," he interrupted gently. "She did what I should have done, what I was too proud, too busy, too blind to do." He turned to Emma. "Tell me about him. Tell me what you know." Emma spoke softly, painting a picture of the man the general had forgotten. "He loves classical music, especially Beethoven. It calms him when he's anxious." The general's eyes widened. He hadn't known that. "He likes green apples because they remind him of the orchard near his childhood home." The general swallowed hard. He'd never asked about his father's childhood. "He gets cold easily even in summer. He likes when someone brushes his hair because it reminds him of his wife." The general's face crumpled. His mother had passed 20 years ago. He hadn't realized his father still missed her so deeply. "And he's scared of being forgotten," Emma finished quietly. "That's what scares him most." The general put his face in his hands. Grace reached across and gently touched his shoulder. "It's not too late, sir." He looked up, his eyes red. "Isn't it?" "No," Emma said firmly. "He's still here. You can still choose to stay." The general sat in silence for a long moment, then straightened his shoulders. When he spoke again, his voice had the command of a man who had made a decision. "I'm transferring him to the military medical center. The best doctors, the best care around the clock." He looked at Emma. "And I'm shutting down Mapleview. Every staff member involved in the medication scheme will be investigated. The manager is already in custody." Grace's eyes widened. "Sir, it's what should have been done years ago," he said. "That place was a warehouse for people society decided didn't matter anymore." He stood and extended his hand to Emma. "You showed me something I'd forgotten, something the military never taught me." Emma shook his hand, confused. "What's that?" "That the strongest thing a person can do isn't leading armies or winning wars. It's choosing to see someone everyone else has stopped seeing." Emma's eyes filled with tears. The general knelt down so he was at her level. "I'm setting up a fund. It's going to be called Little Guardians. For kids like you who take care of people the world has left behind. Emma's voice trembled. You don't have to do that. Yes, he said quietly. I do. Because if I don't, then what you did, what you gave him means I learned nothing. He stood and looked at Grace. Your daughter saved my father's life. If there's ever anything you need, anything at all, you call me directly. Grace nodded, unable to speak. The general turned back toward Harold's room, his steps steady now, no longer weighed down by guilt, but lifted by purpose. He opened the door and sat beside his father's bed. Emma watched from the doorway as the general took his father's hand. I'm here now, Dad. And I'm not leaving. Harold smiled, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. I know, son. I know. Harold was transferred to the military medical center where he received the care he'd been denied for so long. His memory stabilized. His strength returned. The fog that had clouded his mind for months finally lifted. Emma visited regularly, always bringing green apples and stories from school. The general kept his promise. He visited his father every week, sometimes twice, making up for the years he'd lost. And true to his word, he established the Little Guardians Fund, a foundation dedicated to supporting young people who quietly care for the elderly and forgotten. The launch event was held at the military base, attended by high-ranking officers, community leaders, and press from across the country. Emma stood backstage nervous, wearing a simple blue dress her mother had bought for the occasion. Grace squeezed her daughter's hand. I'm so proud of you. Emma smiled, but her voice was uncertain. I didn't do anything special, Mom. That's exactly why it matters, Grace said softly. You didn't do it for recognition. You did it because it was right. When Emma was called to the stage, the entire auditorium rose to their feet. The applause was thunderous. The general stood at the podium, his voice strong and clear. A 13-year-old girl taught me something that 30 years in the military could not. He paused, his eyes finding Emma in the crowd. She taught me that kindness is the most powerful force we have. That paying attention is an act of love. That one person, no matter how small, can change everything. The room erupted in applause again. Emma stepped forward, her face flushed, holding her mother's hand tightly. The general presented her with a framed certificate and a medal engraved with the words, Guardian of the Forgotten. Cameras flashed, people cheered. But Emma's eyes went past the crowd to the back of the room where Harold sat in his wheelchair, tears streaming down his face, clapping harder than anyone. She broke away from the stage and ran to him. He opened his arms and she fell into them. You did it, child, he whispered. You reminded the world that we're still here. Emma pulled back, smiling through her tears. You were always here, Mr. Lane. People just forgot to look. The general joined them, placing a hand on Emma's shoulder. The fund will help hundreds of kids like you. Kids who see what others don't, who care when it's easier not to. He looked at his father, then back at Emma. You gave me my father back. I can never repay that. Emma shook her head. You don't have to repay it. You just have to stay. The general smiled, his eyes glistening. I will. I promise. And this time, it was a promise he kept. A reporter approached Emma after the ceremony, microphone in hand. What made you do all of this? What made you care so much? Emma thought for a moment, then answered simply. Because sometimes, people just need someone willing to sit beside them for a little while. The answer went viral within hours, becoming a symbol of simple, profound kindness. News outlets shared it. Teachers used it in classrooms. Parents repeated it to their children. It became more than a quote. It became a reminder. A week later, Harold invited Emma to his new room at the medical center. He handed her a small box, his hands steady, now his eyes clear. Inside was his old watch, the one she'd fixed dozens of times. This is my most precious possession, he said, his voice thick with emotion. You gave me back the time I thought I'd lost. Emma's tears fell freely. I didn't do anything special. Harold shook his head. You saw me. When the whole world had stopped looking, you saw me. The general stood in the doorway watching the exchange, his own eyes wet. He stepped forward and placed a hand on Emma's shoulder. You'll never have to stand alone again, kid. Not ever. Emma looked between them, these two men whose lives she'd changed simply by showing up, by caring, by refusing to walk past someone in need. She smiled, her heart full. I was never alone. I had him. Harold took her hand, his grip strong and warm. And now you have us both. Outside the window, the sun broke through the clouds, casting golden light across the room. It felt like a beginning. And it was. Emma's story reminds us of something we often forget. Kindness is never small. Paying attention can save a life. A child can do what an entire system overlooks. And sometimes what the military power and money cannot accomplish comes from a heart that simply chooses to listen. If you believe the world is better when we truly see each other, leave a comment. I choose kindness. I want to know, are you watching this story in the morning, afternoon, or evening? Share in the comments below. Thank you for being here, and don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss the next story that might just warm your heart when you need it most.